No. Hi, my beautiful women. Today we are going to get into a very personal topic and one that plagues so many women. Cervical dysplasia is actually the term for cells on the cervix that are abnormal or precancerous. Anytime we hear that C word, most of us get quite nervous, freaked out, scared. And I'm not gonna lie, cervical dysplasia is quite a scary thing. Before we get into it, do make sure that you join our natural living circle by subscribing, and go ahead and hit that like if female wellness is important to you too. Cervical dysplasia is normally detected through a pap smear test, and there aren't normally symptoms that go with it, but I'm gonna get into all of that. Just do remember that the presence of cervical dysplasia doesn't mean that you have cancer or that you are going to get cancer. It is just something that can possibly turn into cancer if it's not looked after. Women of any age can actually contract cervical dysplasia, and it is more common than you think. It is caused by HPV, which is the Human Papilloma Virus. There's so many different strains. I think there's like over 200, and some of them are what can cause the precancerous cells. Some of them are very high risk. You can contract it through sexual contact, and it's actually the most common sexually transmitted disease in the United States, and I'm sure it's the same in many other countries. And this is because you can contract it even from skin to skin touching, so you might not necessarily even have penetration sex, and you still can possibly contract HPV, which can possibly lead to cervical dysplasia. It's said that those who are more likely to contract it have had sex before the age of 16, have had a high number of sexual partners. Those who use medicines or anything that lowers the immune system, which this is key, and again, I'm gonna go over that. Those who smoke cigarettes, those who don't use condoms at all, and also anyone who's given birth before the age of 16. So as you can see, that is really, it's not necessarily a big list, but so many people can find themselves on that list, and that's what makes this such a widespread virus that can be caught, and that's why so many women are affected by cervical dysplasia. For the most part, it is diagnosed by a doctor during a pap smear or a cervical check, which in a lot of countries, they offer that service for free to try and eliminate any cervical cancer. If you have an abnormality during your pap smear, then you will be on one of 3 levels. Sin 1, which is mild dysplasia, Sin 2, which is moderate dysplasia, and Sin 3, which is severe dysplasia. And of course, that one is the most scary for any of us who have dealt with this kind of diagnostic. To avoid it, the medical community tells us that the HP vaccine is what we all should get between the ages of 9 years old to 26 years old. I personally don't agree with that. I am not a medical professional, as most of y'all know who watches this, but I don't feel comfortable with the HPV vaccine. That's just me. There are other things that we can do to avoid getting cervical dysplasia or getting HPV in the first place, and those all go in line with that list that I read earlier. One more thing we're gonna get back to. Most cervical dysplasia cases that are mild will clear up on their own. So normally when it's detected, you will go see your doctor and your doctor will monitor you for something between 6 to 12 months before they see how things are. If it's progressed, then there are treatment options, and if it has cleared up, then you are good to go. The treatment options are very invasive. They are either freezing off the abnormal cells, burning off the abnormal cells, or cutting out the abnormal cells. Honestly, none of them are fun. I don't think any woman listening to those would feel like, oh yeah, I could do that. Even though we can, it doesn't sound very pleasant, and it's not. So for me and my story, here it is. Firstly, I tick a lot of those boxes from the list that I showed earlier. I did lose my virginity before I was 16 years old. I had a boyfriend from the age of, I think, 13 or 14. We were together. That was the only person I was with for a number of years, but I was about to be 16 when I did lose my V card, so that definitely was one of those risk factors. Also, while I think sexuality is fluid and we should experience and have fun in our lives while we're here on this planet enjoying this earth walk, because of cervical dysplasia, I definitely do want to bring awareness to the number of partners that young girls have. I think a lot of women go through this sometimes when you not necessarily have a mentor. I'm not saying that I didn't have mentors growing up or anything like that, but I definitely didn't speak to any of the older women in my family about sexual matters, and I definitely don't feel that I was coached about certain things. And so my biggest thing is, if there are any young girls, I've got loads of my young ones who are on this channel, and this, I'm speaking directly to you to just inform yourself, get all of the knowledge that you can so that you can take care of your body. And also, when it came to the whole condom situation, and I'm American, I live in Europe now, and the reason that I say that is because when I first came over, I was shocked. The whole condom situation over here it's almost non-existent. And where I grew up, that's just like hammered in your head to use condoms and things like that. So if I've got any of my non-American young girls, definitely make sure you are protecting yourself, please. But so here's my story. I'm living over in Ibiza with my Chico. You know him as my husband now, Mick. And there was a point, it was between periods, and I noticed some bleeding. And that was very strange to me because I am a regular girl. There's two types of women when it comes to menstruation. We have the regular girls and the irregular girls. For irregular girl, you can have your period likely at any time. It can come as a surprise. You aren't on a schedule. For us regular girls, it's clockwork. And for me, I was clockwork my entire life. I never skipped. I never had any moment where it didn't come every 28 to 31 days. That was just me. So when I noticed that bleeding, it was shocking to say the least. I didn't know what the blood was or why that happened. And I was also living over in Spain. I knew nothing about medical coverage while I was there. I'm like half freaking out. So what I did was I called the Kaiser hotline and I just explained to them what happened, and they basically told me I need to go and see my gynecologist. I'm like, oh gosh. You know, it's always scary as a human being when something possibly is wrong and you're like just fearful of what it could be. So anyway, a friend of mine, she told me about this amazing gynecologist, and it was so expensive, but I booked an appointment and I went and I got a ultrasound, and the first thing that he noticed was that I had polyps. And so he said that could potentially cause the bleeding, and he basically prescribed me birth control to sort those polyps out. I was delighted. I was like, oh, okay, that sounds simple enough. But he said we have to do the tests and then we can know for sure what the deal is. So I'm like, okay, fine, sounds good to me. A little bit after that, I got called by the receptionist. And the annoying thing about doctors is that they can never just tell you something on the phone. And I'm so impatient, but they make you calm down so they can give you the diagnosis in person. So I went, and it turns out that there's 3 stages: Sin 1, Sin 2, Sin 3, and I was just before Sin 1. So I had abnormal cells, and the doctor wanted to treat them by, I believe he cut them out. I believe it was a biopsy. It was pretty devastating because even though it was a simple procedure, I went home straight away. I just remember I got in the taxi with Mick after, and I couldn't breathe properly. It was like I was so hot and I wanted to get out of the taxi straight away and go home. And then I went home and I absolutely just cuddled in bed next to Freckles, and I just not necessarily cried, but you have that moment where you're breaking down and you just feel so vulnerable and so invaded. And I remember I asked Mick to get me some donuts. I just stayed in bed for the rest of that day. The doctor told me that in 6 months' time, I would need to come back for another checkup. And if the cells hadn't got better, that we would have to take the next step of treatment, which would be something called loop excision. And it just didn't sound fun at all. So after I had my little pity party, the next day I did what I do best, and I just began to research and to really connect, even via blogs and other women who had shared their stories with their cervical dysplasia and curing it naturally. And I learned about so many vitamins to take and to add daily, and I was like, I am going to do this. And I got pretty religious about taking care of my physical vessel, just in the things that I was eating. I went completely Dr. Sebi. If you don't know who that is, sucks for you. But I took on his list of foods and I really was just committed. 6 months later, I shakily went back to the office. By the way, he was a brilliant gynecologist. Absolutely amazing. If you're ever in Ibiza, Dr. Nelson, look him up. But I still was fearful because, as I said before, it's so invasive just to have somebody down there cutting at you. It wasn't nice for me. I don't think it's nice for any women that I've read about or that I've spoken to. But I went back, shaky but ready, and when the results came in, I was completely normal again. It was so joyous for me. Not long after that, I traveled with Mick. We went to Southeast Asia and we were there for 6 months. And it was challenging to be over there for a lot of different reasons. Even though it was a brilliant experience, we definitely were cut off from a lot of the life that we had known living in the Western world. And so just my diet changed to amazing food like Thailand, oh my gosh. But it changed from what I was doing previously, and I wasn't taking any of my vitamins anymore. And when we got to Ireland in 2017, I bled during sex. And this was, again, at no point nearing the beginning of my period or the end. So it was like, gosh, what's going on? That feeling in my chest came back, and I was thinking, oh no, not again. So it was pretty much our first 3 or 4 weeks here in Ireland when that happened. Again, when you are a person like me and you just move to a bunch of different places and you live, when you first get there, you don't know jack schnit about the place, about where to go, things like that. That only comes from experience through living. So I just looked up a gynecologist and I asked Mick to drive me straight over, and it was like, oh my gosh, no shade to the doctor, he's doing his thing. But doctors in separate countries from the ones that I grew up with, they're really different, and that one was proper freaky. Like here in Ireland, doctors are private. So growing up, I was at Kaiser Permanente. It's a huge hospital. I got used to that's how things work. When I was in Ibiza, it was a private practice, but it was really nice, amazing. You're like, okay, like a spa almost. In England, because the way the NHS is, again, it's like a bigger hospital. It's similar to home in a way. Well, here in Ireland, they're private doctors. And this doctor that I went to, I felt like I was getting one of those abortions back in the day where they're in a back alley, and I went into the room. It looked like something out of Hostel. The doctor, he said he was possibly from Russia or Lithuania. I know he told me he speaks both Russian and lots of different languages. He told me that his clinic was specifically for Eastern European women. He was like, why have you come here, basically? I'm just like, I don't know. I just looked you up on Google. But he told me, you can get this for free. You just get cervical check. I don't know what he was talking about. I also was just new in the country. I didn't have my PPSN, which is the card that you need to get the cervical check. And I was panicking. So I was just like, I'll pay however much money, just check me. And he did. And he told me the worst. He told me I had endometriosis. I was just like, what? We had a bit of a language barrier as well. And I was just looking it up on Google because he didn't really give me any information, and it was saying I couldn't have kids and I was being in all this pain and blah blah blah. Ugh. It made things worse for what was going on. And he also said that my abnormal cells were back. So at this point, I started getting things together here in Ireland. I got my PPSN card. I went and booked with my GP, which is general practitioner, I believe, and he did the cervical check for me for free. And straight away, while he was doing the check, he said, I'm going to recommend you to the clinic that handles cervix care. I was like, oh my gosh, he hadn't even gotten the results back yet, and he was alarmed enough to send me to go and get checked. So I went and got checked, and when my results came back, you remember the first time it ever happened, I was just before Sin 1. Well, this time I was Sin 2. It was really, really devastating. I felt like a bit of a failure. I felt like I was mistreating my body, and I felt sad and scared about the potential of having children. And I also didn't want to go through that procedure of getting burned or cut or any of that. So I went and got the burning method. Well, first, after they diagnosed me, they set me on a bit of a monitoring. They took a biopsy and said they will see. So I went and I got it burned off. They did let Mick come in with me. I just closed my eyes the whole time. You don't feel anything when it's happening, except there's apparently the most enormous needle ever that they have to inject you with first. That's the local anesthetic. And then they just went and they burned everything that they saw was abnormal. Again, after it happened, I felt just the same as the first time. You just feel so vulnerable and so almost not yourself after a procedure like that. And the healing, oh my gosh, it took 6 weeks. And it was like the craziest, worst, most horrible smell ever. It smelled like just rotten flesh. And you're basically like pouring water out from your minge. It was just like horrible. And after it was done, they told me, of course, that I have to come back in another series of months to check if the abnormal cells were still there. And then after that, I would have to wait for the results. And if the results came back negative, I'd have to go through treatment again. It was a possibility that the treatment wasn't fully effective. And if it got to any of the normal cells, then we'd be back at square one. That was devastating to me because while medical professionals, I'm very grateful to have them in our communities, and they're so important, you know, and they've made just so much progress for the human race. I'm not throwing shade to them at all, but I just felt like, so are you just gonna keep burning me and hacking at me for how long? You know, I was very like, I don't want to go through this again. So after that took place, I once again got really serious about my research and about wanting to take care of my body. And I spoke to my friend, I love her to bits. Hi, Amber. And she studies herbalism, and when I was telling her about all of this that I was going through, she straight away, just without even batting an eyelash, was like, oh, that's your immunity. You need to keep your immunity up. And it was something so simple, but something that even the first time that I was going through the abnormal cells, I didn't take that into consideration. Even everything that I had read about, it didn't kind of hit it home in that way that my body is or was reacting to a low immune system. And so she kind of coached me on what I could do and what herbs I could take and incorporate daily, aside from the important things like taking care of my nutrition from the foods that I eat and drinking water. She put me on to some fabulous tools and steps that I could take to just look after myself. And that's what I want to share with all of you. The answer to how to naturally cure cervical dysplasia I don't actually know. But I do really believe that it's possible, and it is possible through taking these steps and measures through knowledge. So it's through hearing other women's experience, it's through understanding the facts and equipping yourself so that you can cure yourself naturally if ever you have any kind of abnormal cells. Remember that first and foremost, it is to be preventative. So as I said, that list again earlier on for all my young girls, protect yourself. Know that sex is an important part of life and an important part of this experience if you want to do it. But be patient. You don't need to be doing it so young if it can potentially harm your life vessel. And of course, prevent it by keeping your immune system up, always up. The second way to cure cervical dysplasia naturally is through self-love. And one of the greatest tools for self-love is affirmations. For me, when I was going through the that wait period between am I cured or am I not, I would tell myself certain things like I let go of anything that doesn't serve me, which my good friend reminded me to say. I said to my cervix that she's whole and healthy, and I let all the positivity that I could muster go there so that she could be the whole, healthy, perfect cervix that she is. And next, you can cure your cervical dysplasia naturally by wellness living. And that's through the foods that you eat. That's through taking care of your body fully. So just be conscious of what you're putting into it and what you're putting on it. And finally, for me, one of the biggest ways to naturally cure cervical dysplasia is through vitamins and oils. And what the vitamins and oils do is get your immune system up. And I really have to thank Amber for putting me onto that, because when I started to incorporate, aside from the foods that I was eating, vitamin C supplements and folic acid and specifically black seed oil, I saw a huge difference in my skin, in my hair, in my energy. And when I went back for the checkup, I had to wait again like 6 months, but I received the letter and it said no abnormal cells were detected. Now, because this is part 2 for me, I still feel like I have to live in threes. For me, 3 is powerful. Whenever I try to make a point, I have to have at least 3. I like to live by that code. So when I go for my next one in a year, and when it comes back normal, then I am going to feel even stronger about all of these that I've shared with you today. But the biggest point for me is to impart to all of my sisters out there that you're not alone, that if you believe you can cure it naturally, I believe you can too, and that you got this. Cervical dysplasia is never going to be nice, but I feel like when we know and understand that we have one another, we literally can get through it together. So as always, I'm urging you to treat yourself. Take care of your body, take care of your mind, and take care of your spirit. Beautiful ladies, I am loving you always. I hope you have a fabulous day. Love you to bits, boos. Bye.